Okay, looks like my PowerPoint presentation is on the screen. All right. My background is in trying to find common language, and we look to the subconscious in that from communication studies and psychophysiology. But I stumbled upon something that might be before verbal and written language, kind of geometric symbol. It's the earliest known evidence of an intellectual artifact. It's about 75,000 years old, and it is a rock about 8 centimeters long. And for the past 20 years, because it was found around 2004, it has been described as the first evidence of abstract art. I looked at this, and at the time I was supposed to present in cognitive archaeology on thinking blocks that archaeologists have. And I was like, this is a thinking block because people don't realize it had a function. I don't think we had Picasso 80,000 years ago. I think everything that people used was for their survival, even an etching in stone. And so last year I decided to investigate this as part of a conference invitation. And close to the stone were these tiny shells found with holes in them. And they're about the size of a lead weight we use in fishing. I seem to be the first person who grew up fishing in Italy and in Virginia, my dad, who knew anything about lead weights. And they're so tiny. But if somebody isn't into fishing, they would think that's a bead for a necklace. And that's exactly what happened. The first shells, these first tiny Nacerius shells were found in 1929 by a professor archaeologist in Israel. And she automatically said, these are beads. And maybe for trading. Well, she was from Cambridge, and with the colonizing of Africa from French and British colonizers in the last centuries, there was the introduction of jewelry, which really wasn't so prevalent before, and the introduction for the past several hundred years of trading in beads and making necklaces. So shells are treated like money, but I was not convinced this was an issue of prehistoric capitalism. 140, 70,000 years ago, people worried about getting food and not about profit gains or something like that. We didn't have Donald Trump back then. So I came from a perspective of critiquing archaeology, and they're applying modern values on a prehistoric finding. The shells were found very close to the stone. The shells were found actually at Blombos cave in South Africa around 1994. And then an entire 10 years later, because they were digging very carefully, very slowly in the sand, but not too far, like a meter away was found the stone. When things are found in close proximity, they probably have a relationship, particularly in archaeology or in my area is actually communication studies, and I taught journalism. So in crime scenes, if we find something close together, we also think it might have a relationship. So we're not mathematicians, but we stumbled upon this phenomenon. And we tried to use digital photography to study it better. And so my partner is Susana Pacheco. She's a specialist in archaeology and photography, particularly studying old photographs from sites of workplaces and understanding the workplace. And Blombos Cave, which is on the Indian Ocean in South Africa was found to be a workplace because inside the cave, they found, besides these shells, they found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fish fossils. And they also found red ochre, which is a pigment you get from the rock in the cave. And obviously, they were coloring something. The archaeologists for the past 20 years have been saying, 20, 30 years, have been saying they were using the shells as ornaments, and they were using the ochre, yes, to do cave paintings, but also to do body painting. So I'm just sort of skipping ahead, so I'm making this a little bit faster. Computerized testing was done, a series of them around between 2009 and 2019, including participation from Italy by Professor Ludovico in archaeology. And the use-ware studies studied how the shells were aligned with each other, even though there was no string found. And since the shells had holes in them, how they moved on the string. And it could have been a string made from hair or from animal hide or grasses, we don't know. There's no trace of the string that survived. But these shells were found in groups of about 20, 26. And they're very tiny. And they're not shiny like ornament or jewelry usually is. Plus, the holes in the shells were very, very rough. They did not have smooth holes that you would have on jewelry that slides and doesn't become abrasive. These are holes that were made quickly and almost to be thrown away if the shell didn't work. So obviously, they weren't an aesthetic value. They're not shiny, they're not refined. The holes are not made in such a way that it's comfortable around the neck and that it moves with the body. So I totally threw out this argument for the past 100 years has been used to describe the Necessarius shells. First Necessarius shells were found in Israel, School Cave. One thing to keep in mind, this is School Cave, the entrance, the cave, the water has receded. The water used to be right about here. It's very close to the ocean. And the same with Blombos cave. It is right there, and you have these areas of lagoons where you can basically, drop a net and catch a fish. And in the U.S., I had studied a little bit about indigenous fishing, and our Indians in the U.S. would build rocks and make bays to catch the fish. So this is a prehistoric constructed bay. Now, for some reason, the archaeologists who did the discovery at South Africa, who are still there, running the museum and so on, never put this together. Never thought we might have fishing weights, but the size of the beads there, or the shells, and being that this is near water and hundreds and hundreds of fish fossils were found, they never put together that this might be evidence of prehistoric fishing. And Blombos Cave is right about where the red is, a little bit more over is Still Bay, where the prehistoric fish traps are. This is not so far from Cape Town. So I looked at this and I was like, in journalism, we're always looking for weakness in thinking about a story. I was like, these people are totally flawed. They're thinking jewelry and capitalism and trade beads, and it just doesn't seem to work. So let's go back to the use-ware study. Important is, with the findings in the Necessarius shells in both Israel and Blombos Cave, in South Africa, there's evidence that string was being used. This means that somebody invented string at least 140,000 years ago. This is the first evidence of it. Why would shells be punctured and put on string? And how were they put on? The studies from Van Haren in France and Amy Haddon in South Africa of these shells, photographed and then analyzed microscopically, determined that they were arranged on strings, usually knotted, with a knot between them, so they wouldn't slide. This is not normal with jewelry. They were also put one next to the other symmetrically. Now this down here, the arrangement of one shell opposite the other is a steady pattern and it's very beautiful, but I don't think they were using this as jewelry. When we instead go to the, and one more point. The studies show that the shells were not hanging in a loop. And if you wear a necklace or a bracelet, you will have a definite loop pattern when you put the shells together on a string. This did not occur. They're horizontally across. And this and the proximity of the findings in Israel and South Africa to the water, and the large amount of fish found in the cave, and no other prehistoric sites, particularly inland or anything, has such a large amount of consumed food in the cave. Obviously, here they were worried about, I say, they found a way to catch fish, not just one fish at a time, but many. They ate them, and they didn't throw them back in the water because maybe it would attract sharks or predators or other people who didn't know how to fish, and they would pillage their cave. The cave was very well hidden and obviously very secretive. And so, make sure I've got the zoom up still. Sometimes I lose internet contact too. Okay. So I then wanted to study how these shells would be put on a net and what kind of net. And I wasn't really sure it could have been used for fishing until I would try it out myself. I contacted an archaeologist who worked with the European Association of Archaeology in preparing for a conference this October in Belgrade. And she told me, why don't you just try building a net? I did. First, I tried to use a square net in putting the shells on. And I first even put one shell on one side, one shell on the other to weigh it down at two sides. And the problem is the shells would entangle inside a square net. And I started then looking more carefully at this stone that was found close to the shells. And I was like, wow, this looks like a net to me. It looks like a net engraving. It's diamond shaped. And I remembered that sometimes fishing, my dad would have a diamond shaped net. And so, and I remembered that, oh, I have one from IKEA for shopping. I undid the shopping handbag and cut it out so that it's like a square net. And I got some shells. They're about the size of an Assyrian shells, but they're a little bit different shape. And the only way to prevent the shells from tangling inside the net when you pull it out of the water would be to line them up first as a necklace and then sew the necklace on the bottom of the net. What this does is when you when you cast out the net sinks evenly, perfectly evenly. And then you can pull it back in. Or you can just stand in the water and hold the net out and wait for the fish to go in and then pull it out. And in this way, you can catch more than one fish. This would explain why so many fish fossils were found. What I then did was try to figure out what the red ochre was being used. The red ochre, so powder shaved from a stone like this. Red ochre powder was found on some of the shells, but it doesn't seem like it was used predominantly for the shells. And I did a little bit of research. The predominant fish, easy to catch, is sea bream in that point of South Africa. And sea bream is about the color of red ochre. And I was thinking, well, maybe, maybe not. I mean, I'm more interested in the ability of early people to think geometrically and spatially and to inscribe their design in a stone on how to make a net for other people to know. It seemed to be like a pattern that they etched and then for others to learn from. But also, I wanted to understand how this red ochre was used. And the most likely thing is they colored the net so that it would attract the fish. The color of the net and the pattern of it when it's red is almost sort of this color and design of the fish scales of the sea bream. So my work has been accepted and presented at 2 conferences in the past year, one in Rome, European Association of Archaeologists, and the other I just returned from is the computer applications in archaeology. Let's see if I can get that on the screen. No, so I won't try that unless I do it here. So there's my CAA badge. And I just returned from that on the 7th of May, several days in Athens. When I was in Athens, there was a mathematician in the audience whose partner worked on prehistoric phases, and he was doing studies on the change of vase size from prehistory to modern times. And he thought there was some interest in the math field in my research, just because we're dealing with the first evidence of a pattern or blueprint for structural engineering in creating nets. How does math come into this? Okay, first of all, here's a modern net for catching fish. This diamond shape is very essential in trapping fish at the point of their fins and gills, so they can't get out. It's also good for catching shrimp and lobster, which they have off of South Africa, close into the water at Blombos cave. Somehow, between 140 and 70,000 years ago, they understood the concept of 10 grams. And since these shells are found in groups of basically 20, 12 to 26, all you need basically is about 12 to 13 shells that have a total weight across the net of 10 grams. In seawater, a minimal weight of 10 grams is needed to sink a little bit under seawater level, a very light stringed net. And those studies were done on prehistoric peoples in Puerto Rico and Florida. So I actually had to compare recent prehistoric studies from about 15,000 years ago to artifacts found 70 to 140,000 years ago in South Africa. Because the migration of people from South Africa came up through Europe, Asia, and down into Latin America and Florida. And it seems like they retained some sort of a memory about net fishing and the same sort of pattern of holes in shells and the same idea of 10 grams, at least a sink of net, is found 15,000 years ago in Puerto Rico and Florida. These people knew the concept of what 10 grams weighed like, and that it would take at least a dozen shells across. This is some sort of a numerical system, maybe tactile. Like when you pick up spaghetti and you're going to make enough spaghetti for one person or two people. You take a handful of spaghetti, it's about 100 grams. Take two handfuls, it's 200 grams. These people had a concept of weight and numbers, even if they didn't know they were doing weight and numbers. And my strongest evidence for that is this net design. This is about 8 centimeters long. Other stones were found with a similar net design, and the net design is symmetrically the same on the other stones found in the same cave near the shells. If you're teaching someone without talking how to make a net and weigh it down, you'll need a pattern, like when you do a blueprint to build a building. And you would just align on the bottom of the stone the shells as they should be arranged. So that then by seeing this, they can understand how to arrange the shells and make a net. The cave, Blombos cave, was used seasonally. It doesn't seem it was used all year round. So they would probably have to hide the shells and maybe put a stone marker that would show where the stone pattern was to make a net with the shells nearby or underneath. Thus, I then, with Susana Pacheco, said we should somehow make a campaign to change the mind of archaeologists, because for the past 100 years, they haven't been thinking of shells as aligned horizontally for a fishing tool and as a sign of mathematical calculating ability. For the past 100 years, they've been saying this is jewelry, which does not make sense to me. So early on, before I really came solidly with the net design idea of how the net would look, I thought it would be a square net, because prehistoric nets that have survived, usually string doesn't survive thousands of years, have been sort of squared shape. And these nets were found near rivers, not ocean water. Ocean water is different. And for rivers, you don't need to have weights on the bottom holding the net down. For ocean water, you do. And so I used a prehistoric American net photograph and digitally edited it with putting the shells across to try to think how this net would be if we tried to construct it. And I started to do research on memory, survivability of memory, and the idea that something in the environment can trigger a prehistoric memory in the environment or in our DNA. In psychophysiology, we think there's some sort of memory is never completely erased. It is altered. It is altered by our modern values. An example is thinking that shells would be jewelry instead of fishing weights. But fortunately, I grew up fishing and I knew to look at this as a fishing weight. So I did research on trying to piece together memory. If there's some hope in our DNA or in the environment to recuperate the use of an object. And this is where this computer applications come into the study of archaeology. And in recreating a memory, you want to start with something not detailed, like our prior speaker was saying. Memory tends to be a little bit out of focus. So you want to start with picture or a model that is not detailed, and then sort of like fill in the blanks. And so that's what I did. In recreating the net, I tried to figure out how exactly would this net look? Would it really be square, as normally you would think it should be, or would it be more more sort of diamond shaped? And so in having this visual aid to help me think about it, and I tend to believe in reincarnation, so I was like hoping maybe I was a prehistoric fishing person, I don't know. But somehow I managed to put the visual aid together with making the net and came up with, I'm certain, is the use of the shells, which is based on the stone. It has a diamond shape to it and waits on a net in shallow water, shallow seawater to catch the sea breeze. The studies to back this up also come from Northern Europe. This is more of a river style fish net, but it has shells aligned evenly as weights. And other evidence from, okay, so Finland, and then also from Latin America. Let's see what else we have here and how much time do I have left. Okay, we're doing good. So the important thing is that these prehistoric people figured out a way to consistently make a system of weights that were 10 to 15 grams using a dozen to 2 dozen shells, so really 10 to 20 grams. And they figured out not to put one solid rock on the net to put it down, or 2 rocks. They found the best way to do fishing, which is still the best way when throwing a net, is to have the weight evenly distributed. This is a modern casting net. It's round, it's very evolved. The first use of nets, probably between 140 and 70,000 years ago, would have been just a little tiny rectangular piece of net like that, which is important. They already understood structural engineering in fishing. And at about this time, to support what I'm and Susana Pacheco are asserting, brain evolution in these coastal areas boomed, particularly in Israel. And what lived in Israel between 140,000 and 70,000 years ago was something very human, but maybe a little bit Neanderthalish from the bones. But important is that at about 105,000 years ago, the back part of the brain, called the precuneus, had a giant leap in evolution that would require brain food and our using our hands and mind as a way to stimulate growth in that area, which is exactly what happened. That's where the shells were found first, 1929. The precuneus, which is in the parietal lobe in the back of the head, is where our spatial geometric abilities are, our calculating abilities to look at something and know how far to throw a net. And tied to that is the evolution of tactile abilities, such as weighing the shells to know that's about 10 or 20 grams. All that happened at this seaside coast where they found both the first evidence of really smart people and of the mysterious shells that were found. This gets rid of the myth that 70,000 years ago there was a brain boom with or 60,000 years ago. There was a brain boom because of the invention of the bow and arrow. No, with understanding the use of shells for as weights for fishing, 2 to 5 fish. The first cases of mass murder of fish became the first, I argue, stimulation for brain growth, because fish also is very, very high in potassium and other minerals needed for brain growth. And the first evidence of real brain growth, big jump, is in Israel, where the shells were found in a cave near the water. I think that's my time up. I'll exit if I can the screen here.